This content is for informational purposes only. You should not construe any such information or other material as legal, tax, investment, financial, or other advice. Nothing contained on here constitutes a solicitation, recommendation, endorsement, or offer by Draper, Goren, Holm, or any third-party service provider to buy or sell any securities or other financial instruments whatsoever. And we have a lovely media partner, Blockchain Radio, where all this stuff gets circulated onto afterwards, as in the recording, and you can find this stuff on our YouTube channel as well as previous recordings. And I'm very excited about today's topic. We're discussing all things relating to fair launches. We have Alon from Draper, Goren, Holm. We have Joe from Fair Launch Capital, and we have Stani from Aave. And I'd love for everyone to kind of introduce themselves on a more professional level as opposed to me just handpicking. So Alon, quick brief about yourself. You're usually co-hosting these things, but we have you as a panelist this time. So quick background, and then we'll go to Joe and then head to Stani. And also, what are you drinking too? Make sure to include that.
I think I told everyone this is just whiskey with Sprite, just keeping it simple. I always keep those mini cans of Sprite and Coke in the cupboard, and I always have one or two in the fridge so that I can make my one drink. You know, I'm a lightweight. Alon Goren, Draper, Goren, Holm. We invest in early stage blockchain startups. Background is in tech, fintech. So been obsessed with how we could use technology to either one side of the spectrum, either use it to automate and make regulation really, really, really easy to deal with so that the consumer and the people don't have to deal with it, or use technology to completely circumvent that regulation when possible. You know, our thesis as a fund is to kind of invest in both sides of that fund spectrum. And so we've been participating in this space since for many years now.
Cool. Awesome.
Hey everyone, I'm Joe Gerber. I've got I FOMO'd into a tequila and soda. So I'm good to go. Yeah, so my day job is I'm managing director of IDEO Collab Ventures, which is a small venture fund focused on crypto, blockchain, and Web3. And I have this fun side project with Ruben and Gavin called Fair Launch Capital, where we're kind of experimenting with capital formation and a kind of a new path for founders to launch public goods. And really excited because Stani is one of our advisors.
Awesome. And last but not least, Stani.
Stani, I'm the CEO and founder of Aave. Aave is a DeFi protocol, especially kind of like a liquidity protocol for interest rates yields for different kinds of cryptographic assets. Mainly stablecoin yields are what people are chasing when they're depositing into Aave. And when you're depositing to Aave, a credit line is practically open to depositors, and they can draw the credit line. So you can deposit one asset and borrow another one, or you can delegate your credit to someone else, to whom you trust, to a financial institution, or to a smart contract. So I started building Web2 financial applications, I think roughly 10 years ago, when I was a bit more younger, where I'm still young. But took a detour into the legal industry. That is what my background is, educational background, and that's where I just recently was doing the thesis as well. And then got into Ethereum, mainly for researching smart contracts and how to apply them in dispute resolution, and somehow kind of like continued the path of building financial applications. And we launched a small proof of concept, ETHLend, short from Ethereum lending, and then practically a community started to build upon the product, and it was quite fascinating period. And I think that is when I decided that this might be a pretty interesting project to follow in full time. I'm practically drinking this kind of like a transparent substance. It's I don't know what it can be. I mean, it's in a water bottle, but it could be anything.
I'm gonna go with rubbing alcohol. Let's just awesome. Well, cheers to all you guys. Thank you for being here. I'm really excited to dive into this discussion about fair launches. And just to keep it simple, because we have people listening of all different backgrounds and all different levels of expertises. Either Joe or Stani or Alon, I was hoping one of you guys can give us what is a fair launch at its core? Like what does that mean essentially? So feel free, anyone, take on the definition.
I say, Joe, you go, because you literally have fair launch capital. It's in the name.
Yeah. So the first thing that I'll say is there is no good definition of a fair launch. I think part of the reason we started Fair Launch Capital was we saw these glimmers of really interesting mechanisms for distribution mechanisms and kind of community building. And so I think what we're striving for is kind of to like iterate our way towards a more fair launch and a more fair launch and a more fair launch. The one thing that I'll definitively say is fair launch is often labeled as kind of a project fork and liquidity mining, right? And so this summer that was a lot of like food coins and kind of distributing 100% of the tokens of a network in a short period of time. And one thing that I'll definitively say is that is not necessarily a fair launch. So that's become synonymous with fair launch, but I don't think that's the case. That could be a type of fair launch, but we think that fair launch sits like one level above that. And what got us really inspired and why we started this was, we saw the power of liquidity mining and in terms of distributing ownership and agency to communities. But it's like this crude tool that we're just learning how to use. And so I'm sure we'll get into this, but what we believe is that there's going to be more that, like if that's a hammer, right? Like if that's like a sledgehammer, we're going to have different types of hammers, but we're also going to have a saw. We're going to have we're going to have a whole toolbox in order to build sustainable contributing communities of kind of to create public goods. So rambly answer, but that's where my head goes.
Okay. Anybody want to add to that? Because you kind of give like a tri-layer kind of a definition. Go ahead.
I mean, it's funny because I see I think that everyone is probably full of themselves enough to think that they're not a part of the group that like everyone is talking about. But people don't people in the communities, at least, like if you sit on Discord or in Telegram or whatever in these different groups, they'll talk major shit about VCs and stuff like that. And although I know we fit into the VC column, I'm sitting there going like, oh, they're not talking about me. But in a way, they're kind of talking about me. But the thing is, it's funny because if you ask who believes, like what Joe said, the fair launch of everyone distributing 100% of the tokens up front isn't actually fair, right? Because if that was actually fair, in the normal traditional markets, there would be no such thing as vesting contracts. In building a DAO, there'd be no such thing as vesting contracts. Why would Adam need to vest his tokens in a system where it's like it's all fair? Like why would they need to? Well, the reason is because in 6 months Adam might not pull his weight, and they might need to give those tokens to somebody else who's working on that product or something like that. So I think that fair launch is great for certain. At least I'm thinking out loud and coming up with how I feel about it on the spot in a way, but like it's a great branding mechanism, right? Like if we call something a fair launch, how could it be anything but fair? You can't, vote against a fair launch, but let's say the meme community was a fair launch, but if you didn't happen to be on Twitter at that moment for that 1 hour when they jumped in the Telegram and launched their crazy token, you weren't a part of that launch, but you might have added way more value than most of the people who got free tokens. So there's just so many different ways to look at it, right? So I don't know. I think that there is a more fair launch than what has existed in the past, with certain people being insiders and getting to own more of a piece than other people. But I think it's going to be a goal that's always in the future, that we never really reach if we're trying to, make a perfect launch.
So like, some may even argue that Bitcoin was the first fair launch in essence, right? But really, we haven't really heard about, well, the term hasn't popularized per se until the last few months, right? So I was hoping either Stani, Joe, I mean, maybe we can hear from you, Stani, like where did this uptick in discussions around fair launches come from, and why was it in the last few months, specifically during this DeFi wave?
Yeah, I mean, the thing probably is about the fair launches that when we look a bit of history, how distributions have been done, usually there is someone who creates software, deploys the software, basically keeps some sort of like a royalty of that software, a part of the supply, whether it's currency or governance token and whatnot. And basically, in the past, we have seen like very, very interesting models that, or let's say very interesting projects that have been successful. Just to name it, Bitcoin, Ethereum, also Aave. But I mean, like, then there is a lot of shit that didn't kind of like didn't go anywhere, and and kind of like there was some delivery issues, or just typical issues that they were just high risk startup investments in the sense in a tokenized fashion. And one of the problems is being that what could be a pre-allocation of, let's say, that tokenized power or that tokenized supply, which becomes value at some particular point when there is interest and speculation involved. So I guess like there has been a lot of issues in regarding to that, and at some point after this 2000 let's say 17 18 beginning and so forth, when VCs started to enter the space more and taking positions, and there's more funds, a bit slightly more institutional, what we call in crypto institutional, when it's basically even a VC kind of like. And we see these projects coming and getting funding from venture capital. There's token allocations. There's different kinds of discounts. Obviously, it might be some lockout periods and so forth. And it's somehow seen unfair to some extent that, for example, there's an interesting project, but then the retail is coming kind of like as the last ticket, in the same way as IPO could be seen unfair. So practically what happened is that a few of the developers in a short period of time went actually completely directly to the public with the token, and also in a way that didn't take any kind of like allocation to themselves as a founding team, which is very brave thing to do and very respected in that sense. And kind of like it sparked this kind of like fair model where the token is available to everyone fairly widely distributed, as Alon said. But the problem is that if you aren't like in the right time there, I mean, if you are 2 weeks in a holiday when there's the distribution, you are not getting anything, and it basically ends up in the speculators' hands. And the VCs aren't kind of like living there, or it's not even a question about VCs, but let's say investors and not maybe even users, because the liquidity mining works in a way that the big accounts are like practically farming most of the tokens, getting most of the distribution. And if you have small amount of capital and you want actually exposure to that project, either as a user or just as a community member, you actually have to buy that token to get that exposure. So you're buying from the big accounts, and practically the big accounts are getting it free and making money at the same time. So the kind of like fair launch thesis becomes unfair launch, and that's the kind of like a problematic part.
Yeah. Go ahead. Alon.
Well, what I was just gonna say is I think the general idea is really, really good, but the people, right? Like there's nothing unfair about the person who built a product owning a piece of it and owning maybe a bigger piece of it, or being able to basically work own a piece of it, while other people might buy a piece to get a piece of it. But there's all these people in between, right? Like if you say that Bitcoin was a fair launch, some people might go like, well, I didn't know, I wasn't technically savvy enough to know how to launch a Bitcoin node or mine something, or be in this chat room on a Usenet news group, 10 years ago to even know that this existed, and this was a small group of people and nobody told anyone about it until years later, right? From their perspective. Or in DeFi, right? Like, how am I supposed to know how to use MetaMask? I'm just a random person who doesn't know how to use this brand new piece of technology. So at what level and where they're at, and Stani is totally right. Something could be a fair launch, but the second you do farming or anything like that, basically anybody who has more money than another person. So I think that it would be great if fair launch basically meant that everyone could have access and opportunity. Maybe it doesn't go out to VCs and people in advance. It goes out to participants and people who can, if you don't have a lot of money, be able to, like, PrimeDAO recently launched, and my son, poopoo.eth, actually an 8-year-old wrote a proposal. I have a video of it because I was trying to not be involved, but I knew nobody would believe me. So I have a video from behind him of him actually typing out a Google Doc. He shared it with Pat and with David Blesnak and different people in the PrimeDAO group saying, give me feedback. They gave him feedback. He actually put in a proposal. I coached him up, I stood behind him, but he actually did it, put it on the XDAI chain, did all the stuff that was necessary. And the approval got approved. And this week, as part of the launch of PrimeDAO, him, without any money, but with the ability to launch an NFT, created some NFTs and did all the things he promised in his proposal to do it, right? So although, but you could also look at PrimeDAO being totally trying to be objective and say, well, how come Draper, Goren, Holm got to participate before poopoo.eth got to participate? And stuff like that. So there's always going to be things to nitpick, but I think that our goal always is to be able to create as much of a level playing field as possible, right? Like, why I got into crypto was because it was the same reason I got into crowdfunding, but the reason I got into crowdfunding was because the rules were just not fair. Like the fact that accredited investors exist, the fact that there's a rule for accredited investors is unfair. So to create a more borderless community and a more fair playing field, you have to push the envelope, and we're getting there. We're getting closer and closer and closer. And so
I see you kind of shaking your head and nodding with it. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Well, first of all, poopoo.eth is awesome. So your son is an inspiration. Yeah, I'm nodding my head to a lot of it. I just to summarize a few things that we've kind of come to believe through diving into this space. One, fair is contextual, right? So there is no one definition of fair. So we need to stop arguing over that. So then how do we determine what fair is? I think we have to get more principles based, and I think, Alon, you're starting to speak to some of those around kind of fair kind of or open access or clear communications, and we can start to really create best practices around how much time do you need to give people a heads up that the thing's about to happen. Is it a 3-day window? Is it a 24-hour, whatever, right? We can start to create some best practices around that. I think there's a difference between equitable and equal. So fair doesn't necessarily mean that we all have to get the same allocation to a protocol or whatever. The one thing that I think Fair Launch is responding to is the unfairness that and I think we spoke to this a little bit, that is perceived where VCs get sweetheart deals. And the one thing that I think we are really interested in is we have a thesis that actually traditional VC capital formation model aligns founders with their investors, but not necessarily with their community and with their customers. And so one of the big things that we want to test is there a totally different form of incentive alignment here? So much so that, as Stani said, you're willing to not take any allocation or pre-mine as a founder because you trust your alignment with the community and you want to give them agency. So that's extreme, but I think maybe back to the point is one of the promises of Fair Launch is to better align founders with their communities, because if you start to really think about it, it's all just the community. And then if you really, really think about it, because not all investors are bad, like Alon was saying, most of my time I'm actually a VC doing the VC thing.
It's not that all of them are bad. It's just most of them are bad. They're not.
I'm not hating on VCs at all. But like, if you think about it, VCs are just members of your community, and good VCs are really high value contributors to your community because they're writing proposals in your governance modules. They're building stuff. They're helping kind of refine your UI, whatever it is, right? Like they're just, if you think about it, it's all just different participants in the community. And then what we need to do is start to think about distribution and governance that appropriately rewards those contributions and characterizes kind of like what are value creating behaviors inside of a network. And so going back to what I was saying earlier, it's really easy to reward liquidity provision because it's measurable and it's hard to Sybil attack and things like that. But that's just one form of value creation. And so I think part of what we're starting to explore is like, how do we start to expand our understanding of value creation in networks? And there's lots of cool examples that we can talk about, and then reward that sort of participation.
Well, let's kind of like dive into that. So what are some good like value creation examples that you've seen being implemented right now, for example?
Yeah, I'll throw a few out. I'm sure you all have other ones. So the one of the more recent one is the UMA network has developer mining. So these things are harder to do because you can gain some of this like through Sybil attacks and stuff. But if you find bugs, like that's value creation. If you submit proposals, that's value creation. If people vote for your proposal, that there's signal in there that can be rewarded. I like if you've seen what Kerman's doing with ARC and the Know Your Farmer kind of thing that he's doing, this idea of like demonstrating that you're part of the community by your behaviors. Or Gitcoin has this thing which is like proof of time, where you have to like read an article and do a quiz. So these are all these like kind of like toy examples of mechanics. But or another one is FutureSwap. When they did their alpha, they rewarded liquidity, but they also rewarded referrals, which was like one like it was one step away from providing liquidity, so it was measurable in that sense in terms of value creation. But all of these are like little examples of starting to point at other areas of value creation and figuring out how to characterize them and how to reward them, which I think is really cool.
Stani, how do you what value creation activities have you kind of seen develop in DeFi, outside of DeFi, if any?
I think pretty important part is the governance, and the even doesn't need to be governance. It could be just participating as a community member and the community together. Something that they all believe in. Governance is interesting in DeFi because practically it allows control over a protocol that might have certain value or functionality that is very desired. What's interesting about, for example, in Aave is that in the Aave protocol, the community members are participating in the governance by doing all kinds of risk-based decisions because it's a financial protocol. There's of course like a bunch of other interesting stuff that they're participating in, might not be related to risk, but in essence, as they're making those risk-based decisions, they're also taking the risk either passively or actively. And one of the ways is that they're staking their Aave into this safety module and securing the protocol for the depositors, which is cool because it kind of like is a value loop where the community members are actually fixing those risk parameters that they're comfortable, and also at the same time they're comfortable of actually transfer the risk to themselves with this token economics, kind of like a putting skin and value in the game. And that in essence brings kind of a bit of safety in the protocol, in the sense that if there is a shortfall event, what happens is that those staked funds could be used to cover the deficit. And this is very comfortable idea for example, for the depositors, whether they're retail or institutional, especially in the given time where we see different kinds of hacks happening. I mean, we've seen recently hacks that are just, out there. Everyone knows that this is an issue, and practically developers aren't updating the code base, mainly because first they might not know how to do it. I mean, it might be a fork of a project, and upgrading it might bring some complexity, or they don't understand that they have this attack vector. And there's like a bunch of kind of like issues, and it just requires one big protocol. It could be even like just one big farm to explode in a way that DeFi might not be as interesting for some time period. This is what happened pretty much with Bitcoin and Mt. Gox. And like I see kind of like similar paths. Like when I'm trying to a bit assess like what's going to happen in the future, I try to look at Bitcoin and Ethereum and kind of into the history and see how things evolved there. And I see kind of like similarities there. But I mean, value creation can be done in so many ways. It could be even awarding NFTs. It really depends on what kind of community you have and product. We know that we have a financial product, but we know we have also like a amazing community, and we need to entertain them and have fun from time to time. So it's a composition of many things. And I think the examples that Joe, for example, said is pretty good.
So would you say like that's some of the motivation you had when launching Aavegotchi, like kind of creating additional value for the Aave community of some sort?
Yeah, the ecosystem, because funny thing about Aavegotchi is that it's practically a separate project, and we can encourage them to go with the project and launch it, because it's practically teaching users how to save, community members how to save. So when you earn a token interest, you practically unlock your Aavegotchi, and when you unlock your Aavegotchi, you can basically do all kinds of stuff and use them and have variables and whatnot. And what's interesting there is actually regarding to fair launch is that Aavegotchi is probably maybe one of the only one, or like rarest DICOs, which is a combination of DAOs and ICOs, in a model that practically Vitalik proposed after the whole ICO craziness, in a way that you basically have a fair launch because you are selling the tokens to the investors equally against a bonding curve. So practically, if there's more demand, it's priced in, and at the same time, the team has a allocation, but everything is based on this kind of like a tap mechanism where the governance goes on the tap and expenses and so forth. So that is one of the kind of like ideas of fair launch. And I still don't understand like why it's still kind of like holding back on I mean, they raised probably, I think, like 11 million worth of DAI, but it still kind of has the ICO flavor in it, at least in the name, and the fact that you are selling a token in one way. So kind of like in the current like fair launch models, you pretty much reward liquidity showing up. But I kind of say that there might be something in between as well, in the near future. But it's nice to see that it's evolving as well a bit.
Yeah. Super interesting. I kind of want to head over to the QA really quick. And the first question is targeted more towards Joe and Fair Launch Capital. So this one comes from Richie Rich. What has been the biggest challenge in getting legacy finance investors interested in fair launch in a fair launch in crypto? What has been some of the best questions asked by non-coiners? I'm not too sure what a non-coiner is.
Yeah.
But I guess just narrowing down the question, what has been the biggest challenge in getting legacy finance investors interested in fair launches?
Well, I guess we haven't had to is is the honest answer. So we're not. It's not a VC fund. We're not financed by traditional LPs or anything like that. It's a total community operated and run experiment. So that's one thing. So we're still trying to figure out, I think, kind of building on what Stani was just saying, like we're still trying to figure out what's the sustainable community powered way to fund these projects. And so one of the core things that we're trying to test is this idea of a pay it forward model. So what we need is what we got were a number of donors who kind of committed to put some kind of seed capital into the treasury, so to speak, and then that would be used through credit delegation on top of the Aave platform, and delegate that credit to teams in order to. The simple version of the experiment was we just want to pay for audits for one team, and then they would pay back, and that was kind of the pay it forward, and then we would commit, credibly to then take whatever they pay back and do the next team. So we put that out there about 3 months ago, and the response has been really positive to the point where at first we were thinking of a one-to-one payback, right, where we just do one team and then we hand the baton to the next team, the baton to the next team. And the community was kind of like, no, and founders were like, no, we would pay back 2x or 3x, and then you could do multiple teams. And so now we're starting to design, I don't know if it's a DACO or just a DAO, but we're trying to design something that will kind of like put all the kind of the guardrails in place for that to happen in a trust minimized sort of way. So I guess the short answer to the question is we haven't had to convince traditional folks. Some of our VC friends think we're crazy, but coming from IDEO, we're a bunch of builders and designers who are trying to like break stuff. That the idea of breaking VC is pretty cool. And again, I don't think that it's actually going to break VC. I think it's more like just an alternative path for a specific subset of projects that want to go down this path.
I think the goal should be to break VC and to completely break the model, because it is a model of like access and opportunity that only goes to a small amount of people, right? Like the fact that most VCs, or like a huge portion, a definitely disproportionate portion of VCs all live in like literally like a 20 square mile radius is just insanity, right? That just shows that it's totally unfair and totally not okay. And I'll jump into the question just from a talking about traditional capital in VC world. The VCs do think all of us are insane, and the fact that if you force somebody to like use a crypto wallet to participate, you basically have knocked out 99% of VCs from participating, which is actually kind of cool. But it also, knocks out a huge portion of people who could fund a project, and some of them, can be very awesome. A lot of them are not. Most, the thing is, it depends on what you're looking for if you're launching a company, right? Like, we shouldn't always think if you're launching a crypto company that it's not analogous to a normal startup. But, like if you need money to start a company and there's a group of people willing to risk their money and know that there's a very high likelihood you might fail, that's awesome. If there is a certain percentage of crazy people on the internet like us who don't fit the normal mold of a VC. I live in a condo in Southern California, not in a multi-million-dollar home in Northern California. I don't fit that mold, right? And when they look at me at the events, they literally like look at me like, oh, that's cute, you're still doing that crypto thing. But the thing is, what's going to happen is, we're going to usher in the next wave of stuff, and hopefully more of us participate. And 9 out of 10 of the companies we might participate will fail, just like the VCs. But the 1 out of 10 will be the ones that pay the fund back, like the VCs do. And the more we learn that model and we teach our friends and family that we grew up with that model and get them used to the crazy risk that VCs are used to, we'll get those disproportionate returns that they're used to. And so, I think that, there is a huge, on one hand, there's an opportunity for people who can bridge the gap and get VCs and people who traditional investors to participate in this space is a good thing on one hand. We've talked about this on other events. Like, I can speak out of both sides of my mouth. I can say banks getting into crypto is horrible for crypto because we want to destroy them. And that's why this industry has been built. But on the other hand, banks getting into crypto means that my mom sees the price of Bitcoin go up on her phone and goes, maybe we should buy some Bitcoin, right? So there's good and bad of both sides of everything. So, at the end of the day, I think we want them to participate in some ways, but let's leapfrog them and make sure that the people get the same access they do, or maybe first access, and they could be the ones that FOMO into the deals after us.
So yeah, and I kind of want to dive back into the question. So from your guys' perspective, outside of Bitcoin, right? Because we kind of discussed how some may argue Bitcoin was the first major successful fair launch of its time. I guess aside from the fact that it was the first crypto kind of out there, right? But beyond Bitcoin, what has been the most successful? And this one comes from Cameron Dennis. What has been the most successful fair launch to date? And he adds, success is a function of the amount of money raised and how it is responsibly spent.
Wait, how is that success? Because I have a lot of money and I spent it right means that I'm successful?
To his point of view,
we should get Cameron on stage and give him some shit. Cameron, so it's not, I'm not picking on a random person, just FYI.
No, so I guess, so what has been in your eyes, between Joe, Stani, and also Alon, what has been the most successful fair launch to date? I know YFI came out and that was deemed as a really, really big project that did super well, right? And got a lot of good positive feedback. But I guess outside of YFI also, what projects have you seen that are doing this right, according to the current definitions per se?
Saying that, Wi-Fi was definitely, I think it brought a lot of energy. It happened very quickly as well. So maybe the first people there, also with the big accounts, got quite good of chunk of Wi-Fi. But I think I would say, to that question, I would say something like Aave Gotchi has been pretty cool, and it actually took them a lot of balls to do that, because many are scared about DICOs and also the Wi-Fi style launch models where you actually don't get allocation as a founding team. It really takes a lot of guts, and that is one of the things that many founders are asking. So I try to help as many DeFi projects out there as I just can with my time. And when we have been discussing with this topic, the kind of issue is usually that many are scared that if they go with this model, what kind of incentive they will have, in continuing with the project. What if the community goes against them? This kind of concerns usually are not a big issue, in the sense that, if you found a project, the community wants you to be there, wants to develop, and kind of there's a place for the team and the developers, but it's still always psychologically very difficult, especially if it's your first kind of like a startup. But it's been really interesting to have those discussions, and I don't know where, if you will see in the future like different variations. I would definitely think there will be. I think Joe knows more about like what's coming, but definitely I would think about that. Probably what we have seen now isn't kind of like what we will see. So I think in the future there will be many different interesting experiments.
Joe, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, just to build right off of that, like it's unsatisfying, but that's the honest answer, which is it's still so early. There is no great example of fair launch. I think there's a lot of really cool early examples, Wi-Fi being one of them. But as we were alluding to, like Wi-Fi had an issue with their core dev team where they weren't sure if they were incentivized correctly to do the work, and so that speaks to not distributing all of your treasury or your tokens right off the bat, right? And the one thing that we didn't really talk about is the motivation for getting to being fully decentralized right off the bat is regulatory arbitrage. It's for projects that don't want to be considered a security or to violate securities laws. So they're doing that as a way to kind of like wash their hands of it. But actually, if you're trying to design for building a healthy, contributing community, dumping all your ownership in one like bolus or in one like dump doesn't make sense. Doing it over time and trying to incentivize long-term behaviors, trying to incentivize a core team that continues to contribute and kind of build the network and the protocol. And I think we've got a long way to go. I think there's like lots of cool pieces to borrow. Like, Synthetics is another one that kind of inspired some of this with the way that they distributed their token with vesting, right? That was like a way of pointing at incentivizing long-term holds, which is better for the network. So that's another thing. It's unsatisfying, but I think we're in like earliest days of this, and so we just need to keep experimenting and kind of learning from each other. And that's what's amazing about the kind of Web3 and crypto community is it's open. For the most part, everybody's trying to help each other and learn from each other, which is really cool.
Yeah, I just to jump on that too, that's exactly right. And what's interesting is that people have been trying to get to the most fair type of companies, collectives, group building sort of structures for a very, very long time before DeFi existed. So actually, Joe, you mentioned you went to Santa Barbara. I remember speaking on a panel because of my crowdfunding background at the like incubator on UCSB's campus, like 7, 8, 9 years ago, with some dude who wrote a book about how to create shares and vest for the people who help build a company, who help build a startup. I forgot what the book's called. I wish I knew off the top of my head. So, just because we want to destroy the current model or rebuild the current model to make it more fair and global and accessible to everyone doesn't mean there's things we can't take from it. Like vesting is probably a good thing. And the reason it exists is because of human nature, not because of VCs trying to take advantage of people. But there are terms and things in contracts that VCs that are not honest or not, speaking in the best interest of everyone, just speaking the best. Yeah, Vivek, it might have been the Lean Startup Circle. I'm looking at the chat. It was a part of the Lean Startup Circle that used to do events all over Southern California and of course the world and stuff. But it was a different book. It wasn't the normal Lean Startup book. But that's a good place to start. But anyway, there are things that are bad about the old model, but there are things that are good because they exist for the right reasons. And what's great about crypto is we're actually, from a model standpoint, most products are actually a throwback to community banking. They're just no longer legal or no longer used in the traditional sense. Like imagine if every person who deposited money into Wells Fargo got to own a share of Wells Fargo or got to own their proportion of Wells Fargo. That would be pretty awesome. That's exactly what community banks used to be. Like, communities would own the community-owned bank together. And that's where we're going. It's just that we got so far away from it with the way everything works and regulation. And the people in the chat were talking about accredited investors and stuff like that when I mentioned that earlier. It doesn't make sense, right? Like, the accredited investor laws were meant for people who had money. And the idea was, like, you couldn't go into a bar in the 40s in the United States and get tricked into buying shares of a railroad that didn't exist, right? And if you were wealthy, you could, at least you could withstand the loss. So they created accredited investor rules. But in this day and age, it makes no sense. Just because you have a lot of money doesn't make you more sophisticated. So they tried to fix the rules by saying, if you're not rich, we're going to make you take a test. Well, that's totally fucked up, because it's like saying, if you don't have a lot of money, you're stupid, and so we're going to make you pass a test. What would be nice is, if you're going to have a test, make everyone take the test. If you're going to have rules, make them apply to everyone equally, and they shouldn't have to do with that, right? So sorry, I'm reading the chat at the same time. But anyway, I think what Joe said is exactly on point, right? Like this, we're getting closer, and we're going to iterate and iterate and iterate. Like, what people called a fair launch before won't be fair, because the developers won't have a reason to build, because maybe one of the developers didn't have enough money to buy the tokens when there was the launch, and now what the hell? Like, why would I keep building? I can't. There's no incentive for me, or I can't get paid. Or the DAO doesn't have money in the coffers anymore, or they didn't accept my proposal to keep working. So why do I keep building on it? Maybe I should fork it and make my own version. Is that fair? I don't know.
So jumping back to the QA, this one comes from David Freuden. So given the anonymity in crypto, how do you really know distribution is fair, such as the hundreds of accounts being set up by one person to collect airdrops, or benefit from a Uniswap token drop? I mean, that wasn't the perfect English, right? But like, how do you guys know someone is just not creating a bunch of wallets, right? And cashing in on all these airdrops, and this whole concept of fair distribution is actually just a blur.
Wait. Before we begin, people have more than one wallet?
Believe it or not. Believe it or not. Who would have thought? Yeah.
So I think that's why liquidity mining has kind of been the primary way for distribute, because you're either giving money or not. And so that, I'm not saying that that's fair. I'm saying it's provable, right? And it's provable value contributed to a network. There's a lot of interesting work going on right now around kind of Sybil resistance, which is kind of like that problem of multiple wallets, or kind of like hacking the system by creating multiple identities. But like Bright ID is a good example of an attempt at creating like a self-sovereign kind of identity network. And I don't think we're close to that, to be honest. So what we need to do is find other skin in the game ways of measuring value creation and then distributing against that. The other technique, which the person asking the question referenced Uniswap. Retroactive distributions is a really interesting way to get around some of this, which is when there's when you reward people after the fact who had no expectation of reward. So they're showing up with intrinsic motivation. They really want to use the product because it creates value for them. They really want to help build the product because they want it to create even more value for them and the rest of the network. That's a pretty cool hack at the Sybil resistance, or the Sybil problem. And so the problem is, then you get into this kind of arms race where then everybody's expecting a retroactive distribution, and so then you lose some of the intrinsic motivation.
I have seen some community members be like, what the hell, I used the product before, how come I didn't get something like on a project that didn't do it? And now like everybody's hoping and expecting it.
There's some cool examples. Like, I don't know if you caught RAC's, this Grammy-winning artist who and he
really epic NFTs too, by the way. Really cool stuff.
And he gave tokens to everyone who supported him over the last 10 years on Patreon and places like that. So that's really cool, right? That's there's an authenticity to that. The other way we've been seeing really, building on the NFT point, is we've seen people kind of like handing out badges, and then with no value to those badges, but maybe down the road they have more meaning. You could start to accumulate a profile, right, of like a variety of badges that then make you worthy of an airdrop, whether from one token or maybe many. So I think that's something that will happen eventually, but there's no good solution to that problem.
Cool.
Just to throw out there, I think something that was really cool that a group did was Gitcoin made a really easy way to see who has participated and contributed to Git grants in the past. So if somebody wanted to airdrop a community, like let's say they don't have a community yet, and they just want to airdrop a token or an NFT or somehow reward people who participated in the Ethereum community as a whole, you could reach out to that group, which is pretty cool. I think like making mechanisms
explicitly for this reason, right? They open source that explicitly for this reason. And there's this idea of a contribution graph that's starting to form in crypto, where Gitcoin's a great example of that, because people are like actively and altruistically participating in creating public.
I wonder if that will change, right? If people will do it selfishly, which I think is a good thing too. But like I only participated in Gitcoin 2 or 3 times in the last couple of years since they've been in existence. And it's just because like a random person I followed on Twitter that was doing like a podcast or a newsletter said, I put out, a request, and I was like, that person is awesome. Like I throw random $50 here, $100 here on these stupid projects because I want to experiment. Why don't I give this person $20? I read their newsletter every week or whatever. And you do it with no intention, right? Like you don't think you're going to get anything in return. But now if you think you might get something in return, there's a different feeling. But I'm not against that either. Like people give money to charity all the time because it's good tax deduction. Like that's wonderful. Like give more money to charity.
If you're mining future tokens by contributing to public good, like the creation of public goods, then that's not okay. But Gitcoin's pretty unique in that context.
Cool. I love it. I'm just looking at the chat right now, and David, this one's coming at you, Stani. Aave should totally issue badges for early Aave stakers. Let's vote on it.
Amazing, and this is an interesting part. Now, practically the whole protocol is under like decentralized governance. I mean, anyone is that is part in the community and is holding tokens are voting on, or even like if you don't have tokens, you can participate in the governance discussions. So this is stuff that we really want to see actually happen. And currently the Aave team develops most of the stuff. But I think in the future there will be more community developers and some sort of a DAO way to reward people for building things and coming up with these ideas. So I'm really trying to also push the narrative that like community and kind of like contributing to a DAO. It's not just about developing, and the security side, but there is sort of things involved in soft skills that are very important, especially education, because the more I see, it's more about education. Of course, security, the whole space, DeFi, but education mainly. If users can't make the difference where they're depositing, for what reason, or using different protocols, I mean, we have a difficult scenario.
Yeah. Cool, guys. This has been a really fun discussion. I kind of want to wrap it up. And before we do, Alon, Joe, and Stani, kind of give us the details of where we can find you on Twitter, LinkedIn, wherever it may be. Go for it, Alon.
I'm mostly hanging on Twitter. Everywhere else, I don't usually respond to DMs and things like that because they're just full of too much junk and spam. Most of the time right now I'm on Twitter or in the Prime DAO Discord and all that. But hit me up also at Draper, Goren, Holm if you or your friend is an early stage startup and we wanna hang out.
Nice.
By the way, I want to just one up that last note of like participating in a DAO isn't just for engineers and developers and things like that. Like I've actually, one of the biggest things I've noticed in me goofing around with DAOs and participating is that more of the proposals relating to marketing, to helping with different things are probably, not that they're more important, they're definitely, like you have to build the product, right? So engineers are really important, but if nobody knows they exist and nobody participates, it's really, really hard to get anything off the ground. So, come and participate in things you find. Don't just wait for that moment where you could farm a token or something like that.
Cool. Joe?
There we go. I'm on Telegram at Gerber. Excuse me, Gerber. You can also follow Fair Launch Capital on Twitter at Fair Launch Cap. We're doing a program with Gitcoin called the Fair Launch Track for their kernel program. So they're doing kind of an accelerator for a bunch of different types of projects, but we're excited to include Fair Launch into that. So check it out.
Cool.
Hit me up if I can help with that. I want to be a part of that. That'd be awesome.
Right on.
And last but not least, Stani.
Yeah, just a quick one. So basically, Stani Kulechov is my Twitter handle, and find me there. And of course, if you guys invite me again here, I will maybe we'll be drinking something else. But we should do this on Fridays, though.
Oh, honestly,
it's easier to justify.
Another series, Alon? Are we thinking another series?
Just move it twice a week.
Blockchain bot.
Just do it, I don't know. We did it Tuesdays, I think, at the beginning of this because we thought it would just be for like 2, 3, 4 weeks. It's like 9 months of doing these now.
This is our 33rd one.
33rd one?
Yeah.
Holy crap.
Yeah.
Pretty awesome.
Quarantine's leading me out. Let's do it. Cool, guys. Cheers one last time. Thank you for being here. It was so much fun having you with Stani's rubbing alcohol. Joe's, Alon's wife's concoction. I love it. Guys, before we break off, my favorite part of Blockchain Abu is this networking segment where I'm going to end presentation mode and we're all going to distribute to these colorful tables, and we'll be able to meet with everyone that's watching and tuning in live right now. So in order to do so, when I end presentation mode, make sure to have your cameras on, make sure to have your microphones on. Otherwise, you're going to be ridiculously confused. So cameras on, microphones on. Let's do it, guys. We'll see you next week. Thank you so much.
Cheers.
Cheers.